Salve discipuli. We are starting again with our Daedalus and Icarus this week. Today we're doing lines 193 to 202. It is a little bit of a longer stretch of lines than last time, so make sure you are ready for that. Have something to take notes with, whether you're doing it on a packet, in a Google Doc, or something like that. And let's get down to business. Before we get started, reminder of our themes. We want to think about what happens when humans do things beyond human abilities, the appropriate relationship between a father and a son, and how human flaws contribute to their downfalls. So a reminder before we start taking a look at this text. So far, we have essentially started to read about why Daedalus decides to craft wings. And we're getting now into the shape of him constructing the wings, right? Trying to make them look like real bird wings. And he's going to finish that off here in these lines on this slide, and then he's going to start getting prepared for flight. So today we are starting with tum lino medios et caries alligat imas, adque ita compositas parvo quadramine flectit, ut veros imitator avis. So we're just half of line 195 there. We'll continue it on the next slide, but we have reached a full thought there. So one thing we want to make sure when we're starting to take a look at this is that we want to supply the word feathers or penas with medios and imas. And let's begin. We start with tum, which means then, and we go to our verb alligat, he binds. Remember, this is still talking about Daedalus doing this, so he is our understood subject, going with he. So he binds the medias, and remember we're understanding feathers with that, so the middle ones, or the middle feathers, you can supply the word, with lino, with string. Right, so those are the feathers that if we would take a look at a wing down here, right, that are in the middle there, that he's binding together with string. Okay? And then, right, he says, and the imas feathers, the bottommost feathers, so that's probably our ones up at, unfortunately, the top here, right, with caries, with wax, right? And what does he do next? He flectits, he bends, right? We get the word flex from this word. He bends them, having been compositas, having been arranged. So that's a perfect passive participle. We're also understanding penas with that as well. He bends them in such a way, right, or in a small curve, right, in such a way that, so this is introducing a result clause. So ita is our adverbial clue word that's introducing the result clause in the next line that goes from ut to always. In such a way that it imitators, it imitates, it resembles veras aves, real birds. Okay? So one thing to note about imitator here, it is a deponent verb. So while it looks passive, we translated it active. Another thing we might want to note is the parvo quadramine there. That's an ablative of manner because it's describing how he bends the wings. Right, and that's what we got going on here. So make sure you pause, get all your notes down, get your translation down, and we'll go on to the next bit. All right, so the rest of line 195 continues. Puer Icarus una, stabat et ignoraros sua se tractare pericla, ore venidenti modo, quas vaga moverat aura, captabat plumas, and that's another half of the line. So I'm going to note here when I'm getting half of the lines. So now we're going to get into Icarus. This is the first time we see him show up in this story, and so I want you to think about how he's behaving here. And remember that he's maybe around your age, right? 14, 15, somewhere around there. Maybe a year or two younger. Some depictions you'll see him as even older, but I'd figure probably like, a high school freshman or a little bit younger. So we have puer, right? And so that's what we're translating puer, the boy. And puer can be anybody from like a 7 or 8-year-old to a 16-year-old. So the boy Icarus was stabating. He was standing. And una here means together, right? It comes from unus, right? One. So if you're doing it one-ishly, right, you're together. Or we're understanding together with Daedalus. So he's standing next to him. and then we get the adjective ignoros, ignorant or unaware. And that is introducing an indirect statement because this adjective has a verbal idea. It is a mental action to be unaware. And it comes from, of course, the Latin verb ignoro, ignorare, right? Do not know. So unaware that he, right? Remember, this is our reflexive pronoun that refers back to the subject Icarus, that he was tractare, that he was touching sua pericla, his own doom. Let's pause on pericla for a second. If you guys are remembering a vocab, this is usually the word periculum, right? And that would be the neuter accusative, his own dooms, plural. Right, but you'll see that we dropped out the U syllable, right? It just became, instead of pericula, pericla. And this is what we call syncopation, or it's Greek for shortening or mushing together. And this is something that happens quite a bit in Latin poetry, often because, again, we want to fit into the meter. You might want to do it for dramatic effect, right? Because this is increasing the tension to go a bit faster here at this stage in the story. So that's what he's doing there. So it is periculum. It's pretty obvious that it's periculum. You might not have even noticed that it was spelled slightly off, but this is a technical term that we often see in poetry. We call it syncopation. So Icarus was standing together with Daedalus understood and ignorant that he was touching his own doom. Right? And here we've got the beginning of a correlative pair, right? Things that go together. The first motto here is on this slide. The second motto is on the next slide in line 198, I believe. And so we translate them as at one time and at another time. So at one moment, we have an ablative absolute here, ore ridenti. That's our present active participle because of the nt, with his mouth grinning. And then we have to skip over the relative clause for a second because its antecedent is actually more of a postcedent, and that happens all the time in Latin and in poetry. He was capturing, he was seizing, or taking the plumos, the feather. So plumos, penos, all mean feathers. We get the English word plume from this. He was grabbing the feathers, which, so clause is referring to plumos, the vaga aura, the wandering breeze, had moved. Pluperfect tense there. So we see a little depiction of that there. The child chasing after the feathers in the air, right? So he's playing with these things. He's not taking it particularly seriously. And keep that in mind of your conception of Icarus. Pause here if you need to stop and take some notes, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So what else is he doing to play around? We have modo at another time. So there's our second modo. See the note on the previous slide if you've forgotten. He, at another time, he was molibotting. He was softening, right? And that's also a shortened. It should be molieba, but, we mush it together because poetry. He was softening the flawam keron, there's a direct object, the yellow wax, with his polyke, his thumb. And with his lusu, his play. So this is related to the verb ludere, to play. With his play, he was impediebating, he was hindering, he was getting in the way of the mirabile opus, the miraculous work. And then pause here for a second. Opus here, it looks like it's nominative, but this is actually one of our neuter third declension nouns. So while its nominative ending is us, and it's neuter actually. So this is a lot like the word vulnus, which means wound, or litus, which means shore. So this opus here is actually accusative because it's the nominative form and it's neuter, so same form in the accusative. So he was hindering the miraculous work of his patris, of his father, right? So Daedalus is trying to get these wings together, and Icarus is just messing around like a fool, right? And remember, he's supposed to be a bit older, right? I don't really think we want to read him as a super young boy. We probably want to see him, and not quite as a young adult either, but more like, like an 8th grader, 9th grader age, right? Where they're still in that in-between stage where sometimes they're very childish and sometimes you're like, okay, you're getting close to being an adult. Right. Just a few more lines here. We're going to finish off 200 in the next year and get all the way through 202. So post-quam, afterwards, right, the manus ultima. So here it literally means final hand, but this is more like final touches on a piece of work, because manus is always associated with crafting. The final touch was impositad, was placed onto, and then it takes coipto, right, put onto, this is an indirect object, dative, the thing that had begun, right, the thing that had been begun. This is perfect passive in the dative case, and that's because it's a give, show, tell verb, imposita. Then we have, so after all that happened, things are done. The opifex, the craftsman, right, the one who makes stuff, right? You can see the beginning of the word opus in there, right, the one who does work. The craftsman libraudit, right? So be careful with this word. It looks like it should be free, right? Really similar to libero, but libraue, if those of you who are familiar with constellations, astrology stuff, Libras, right, are always depicted as a scale, a balancing. So libraue here means not free, but balance. So the craftsman himself, right, we're getting the himself from the reflexive pronoun ipse, he balanced suum corpus, his own body, and that's the reflexive adjective there with corpus, and corpus is another one of our third declension neuter nouns. So us here is actually the accusative ending. He balances his own body on or in between the geminas alas, the twin wings. And so we see again that anastrophe, right? That separation of the noun in the prep phrase from its adjectives for dramatic effect, right? And it creates a beautiful little bit of a word picture here. That's when you have words that are arranged in a way that reflects the meaning of the lines. So the word picture here, we see opifex, the craftsman, and the word for craftsman is literally between the words for twin wings, right? Because that's how he's going to arrange himself, right? Though he's going to be between the wings. So it's beautiful little artistry. And so there's a point to the anastrophe here. So the craftsman himself balanced his own body in between the twin wings, and he hung in the breeze having been moved, or in the moved breeze. So this is him not being taken up by a gust of wind, but rather he has flapped his wings, moving the breeze himself, and that forces him to levitate into the air. And again, mota here as an anastrophe, right? It's going with aura, right? And again, he's sort of hanging in between the air, hovering, really. So that's what we got going on in these lines. So make sure you got all your notes down. You're going to head back to Google Classroom, and you're going to complete the assignment for Daedalus and Icarus, lines 193 to 202. And that's it for today.